I married you for revenge, the Duke of Thorncliffe confessed, at last, on the night he could no longer bear the weight of the lie, against your father, who ruined mine. I married you to take from him what he took from us, and I have used you, Margaret, coldly and deliberately, from the first day to this, and you deserve to know it, and to hate me for it. And his wife Margaret looked at him across the firelit study with a calm that undid him more than any tears could have, and said, I know, I have always known. I married you for love. The Duke of Thorncliffe went very still. He had rehearsed this confession for months, had braced for her shock, her fury, her tears, the shattering of a woman learning that her whole marriage had been a weapon aimed at her father through her. He had not, in all his rehearsing, once imagined that she might already know, and he had certainly not imagined the second half of it, the 4 small words that reached into his chest and closed around his heart. I married you for love. You knew, he said, from the beginning. You knew I married you to revenge myself on your father, and you married me anyway. Why? Margaret, in God's name, why would you marry a man you knew was using you as a weapon against your own family? And Margaret Thorncliffe, who had carried her own secret every bit as long as he had carried his, set down her needlework and told him the truth she had guarded through the whole of their strange cold marriage. Because I did not love my father, she said. That is the thing you never understood, Julian. Because you were so consumed by your hatred of him that you never troubled to learn what he was to me. You saw him as the powerful man who ruined your family, the enemy, the villain, the man you meant to punish, and he was those things. But to me he was something else first. He was the man who ruined mine. You are not the only person my father destroyed. He destroyed me too, slowly, from the inside, for 21 years, before he ever ruined your father. He was cold and cruel, and he valued me at nothing, as he valued everyone at nothing who could not advance him. He beat my mother's spirit down until she died of it. He kept me as an unpaid drudge and a marriageable asset, and he intended to sell me to whatever alliance most profited him, and he reminded me daily that I was worth nothing but the connection my marriage might bring. I grew up in that house, Julian, the way you grew up in the wreckage he made of yours. Both of us shaped by the same cruel man. Both of us his victims, though you never saw that we had that in common. She rose and came to stand before the fire, and the Duke watched the woman he had married as a weapon become, in the space of a confession, a person he had never troubled to see. So when your suit came, Margaret went on, I understood it at once for what it was. I am not a fool, whatever my father thought me. A duke whose father my father had ruined, suddenly paying court to the ruined man's overlooked daughter. I knew it was revenge before you had finished your first pretty speech. Any woman with sense would have known. And I married you anyway, for 2 reasons, and I will tell you both, since we are telling truths tonight. The first is that marrying you took me out of my father's house, which was the thing I wanted most in the world, and had no other way to achieve. You were, whatever your motive, my escape, and I would have married a far worse man than you to be free of my father. And you were not, under the cold and the calculation, a worse man. I could see that even then. And the second reason, her voice wavered for the first time. The second reason is that I loved you, almost from the first. I do not entirely know why. You were cold, and using me, and I knew it. But there was something under the coldness, a woundedness I recognized because I carried its brother, and I saw the man you might have been before my father broke your family. And I fell in love with him, with the man under the revenge. And I married you knowing you did not love me, knowing you were using me, hoping, foolishly, against all sense, that in time the man I saw underneath might come up into the light, and that my love might reach him, and that the revenge might, someday, dissolve into something better. That is why I married you, Julian, not because I was deceived, because I saw everything clearly, and chose you anyway, for love, hoping to save us both from the same man who had broken us both. So when you confess tonight that you married me for revenge, I know. I have always known, and I have spent our whole cold marriage loving you and waiting for you to notice that your weapon against my father was, all along, the one person alive who understood you, because she had been wounded by the very same hand. The Duke of Thorncliffe stood in his firelit study and looked at his wife, the woman he had married to punish her father, who had married him for love, knowing everything, and felt the whole elaborate architecture of his revenge collapse into rubble around him, because it had been built on a lie he had told himself, that Margaret was her father's creature, her father's asset, a piece of the man to be seized and used. And she was not. She was her father's victim, exactly as he was, and he had spent a year using one of the cruel man's victims as a weapon against him, which meant that his revenge had not struck his enemy at all. It had struck, all this time, a fellow sufferer, the one person in the world who had loved him. "I have been a fool," he said, low and stricken, "a worse fool than I knew. I told myself I was punishing your father through you, and all this time I have been punishing you, his victim, not his ally, using the woman who loved me as a stick to beat the man who had hurt us both. I never even saw you, Margaret. I looked at you for a year and saw only your father's daughter, a means to an end, and never once the person, never once the fellow prisoner, never once the woman who married me for love and has waited a year in the cold for me to notice. My revenge was not aimed at my enemy at all. It was aimed, the whole time, at the one ally I had, and I have wounded her for a year, and she has loved me through all of it, and I did not even know." He put his face in his hands. "What have I done? What have I done to you, Margaret, and to us, in the name of a revenge that never once touched the man it was meant for?" For it had been a cold year, that first year, and Margaret had lived through all of it, loving a man who did not see her, and she thought of it now, watching him break, with a strange tenderness, rather than bitterness, because she had chosen it with her eyes open, and did not regret the choosing. She remembered the wedding, correct and joyless, the Duke handsome and remote beside her, going through the forms of a marriage he regarded as a transaction, and Margaret standing beside him in her plain gown, knowing exactly what she was to him, and marrying him anyway, because a woman who has decided to gamble her whole heart does not flinch at the odds. She remembered the first months at Thorncliffe, the vast cold house, the courteous distance, the way he would sit across the dinner table from her and see, she knew, not his wife, but his weapon, a piece of her father's power transferred into his keeping. She had not wept over it. She had done instead what she had always done in her father's house. She had made herself useful and quiet, and had watched, and had loved him in secret, patiently, the way one tends a fire in a cold room and waits for the warmth to come. And she had learned him, in that cold year, better than he knew. She had learned that the coldness was armor, not nature, that under the remote ducal front was a man in pain, a man who had lost his father and his family's fortune, and his whole young happiness to her father's greed, and had survived it by turning himself to iron. She had learned that he was, when he forgot to be cold, unexpectedly gentle, that he was kind to his servants without meaning to be seen, that he grieved his dead father in private, that there was a wound in him exactly the shape of the wound in her, both of them made by the same cruel hand. She had learned to read the man under the revenge, and the more she read him, the more certain she became that she had gambled well, that there was, truly, someone worth loving beneath the armor, and that her patience would be rewarded if only she could outlast the hatred that held him. She had said nothing all that year. She had not told him she knew his motive. She had not told him she loved him. She had not pressed, or wept, or demanded that he see her. She had simply been present, and patient, and warm in the small ways she was permitted, and had waited, because she understood that a man does not surrender a decade of hatred to a demand, that the armor could not be pulled off from outside, that all she could do was be there, steadily, loving him, until the day he was ready to set the hatred down himself. It had been a lonely year. There had been nights she had wept, quietly, alone, wondering whether she had gambled her whole heart on a warmth that would never come, whether she would grow old in this cold, correct marriage, loving a man who would never once look up and see her. But she had held on, because holding on was the thing Margaret did, and because she had staked everything on the man under the revenge. and a woman does not abandon such a stake at the first cold winter. And now, tonight, the waiting was over. He had confessed and repented and seen her at last, and Margaret found, looking at her stricken husband, that the whole cold year had been worth it, every lonely night of it, because it had brought them here, to the truth, to the beginning of the thing she had gambled on, and hoped for, and refused to give up. She did not resent the cold year. She counted it the price of the warm life she could feel, now, beginning at last, and it was a price she would have paid twice over, because the man breaking in front of her was exactly the man she had bet on in the dark, and she had been right, and being right about the man you love is worth any winter. You will stop torturing yourself, Margaret said, because it helps no one, and because I did not tell you the truth tonight, in order to watch you drown in guilt. I told you because I am tired of us both carrying our secrets alone, and because I have hoped for a year that this night would come, and now it has, and I would rather we spent it building something than watching you flagellate yourself. So, come and sit, and let us talk like the two survivors of the same man that we are, and let us decide, together, what to do. Because there is a thing that must be decided, Julian, and you know it, and it is the reason I am not simply weeping with relief that you have finally seen me. The Duke sat, because she told him to, and because he had discovered, in the space of an hour, that he would do a great many things Margaret told him to. The revenge, Margaret said. It is still running, isn't it? You did not merely marry me. You have been moving, this whole year, against my father, buying up his debts, is it? Or his mortgages, or maneuvering to seize the estate he cares about more than any person. I have watched you do it, quietly, and said nothing. And now you have confessed the marriage, and repented it, and seen me at last. But the machine you set in motion against my father is still grinding forward, and the question you must answer, that we must answer, is whether you complete it, whether you finish the revenge. And I will not tell you what to do, Julian, because he is your enemy as much as mine, and you have as much right to justice against him as I have. But I will tell you what I have learned, sitting in your cold house this year loving you, and watching you eaten alive by your hatred of my father, and you may weigh it as you like. Tell me, the Duke said. Revenge did not save either of us, Margaret said quietly. That is the whole of it. My father ruined your family, and you have spent, how many years, living for the day you would ruin him back. And it has not healed you. It has not given you back your father, or your family's fortune, or 1 hour of the peace he took from you. It has only made you cold and consumed, and cruel enough to marry a woman as a weapon and not even see her. It has made you, Julian, a little like him, which is the thing revenge always does in the end. It makes you resemble the person who wronged you, because you organize your whole life around him, and you become his creature exactly as surely as if you loved him instead of hated him. I watched my father destroy people for 1 in 20 years, and I promised myself, young, that whatever he did to me, I would not let him make me into a version of himself, cold and calculating and consumed. And you are on the very edge of letting him do exactly that. If you complete this revenge, if you spend the rest of your life grinding him down, seizing his estate, watching him fall, you will have your justice, and it will be, I do not doubt, richly deserved. And you will also have given him the last and deepest victory, which is to have made you into a man who lives for hatred, exactly as he lived for gain. He will have shaped your whole life, from beyond the wreckage, into a monument to himself. That is what revenge is, in the end, Julian. It is letting the person who hurt you decide who you become, and I do not want that for you. I did not marry the man under the revenge, in order to watch the revenge devour him. The Duke of Thorncliffe was silent for a long time, staring into the fire. Then he goes unpunished, he said at last, roughly. The man who ruined my father, drove him to his grave, destroyed everything. He simply goes on, unaccountable, while I let it go for the sake of my own soul. Where is the justice in that, Margaret? Am I to let him win? He does not go unpunished, Margaret said. That is the thing hatred cannot see, because hatred wants to be the one holding the whip. My father is punished, Julian. He has been punished every day of his life, and will be to the end of it, by the simple fact of being himself. He is a man with no love in his life, because he has valued no one, and so no one values him. A man whose wife died to escape him, and whose daughter married the first man who offered, to be free of him. A man who will grow old, cold and alone, and unmourned, surrounded by the wreckage of every relationship he ever had, because he could never see another human being as anything but a means. That is his punishment, and it is a far worse one than any seizure of an estate, and it requires nothing of you at all. It is built into the man, and it grinds on whether you lift a hand or not. You do not need to punish my father. My father is his own punishment, and always has been, and always will be. What you need to decide is not whether he suffers. He does, endlessly, by being himself, but whether you will let your hatred of him cost you the one thing he can never have, and you still might: a life with love in it. He cannot be saved. We can. Choose us, Julian. Let the machine stop, not because he deserves mercy. He does not. But because you deserve a life that is not organized around him, and so do I. And so does the marriage we might build if you would only put down the weapon and pick up the wife who has been standing here loving you the whole time you were aiming it. And the Duke of Thorncliffe looked at his wife, who had every reason to hate her father, and had chosen not to be shaped by hatred, who had been the cruel man's victim as surely as he had, and had refused to become the cruel man's monument, and understood that she was offering him the way out of the trap he had been in so long he had forgotten it was a trap, the trap of a life lived for revenge, which is a life still ruled by the person you hate. She was showing him how to be free of her father at last, not by defeating him, but by ceasing to let him matter, by turning away from the hatred entirely and toward the love he had nearly thrown away. "You are asking me," he said slowly, "to give up the thing I have lived for years, the one purpose that got me through my father's death and my family's ruin, the promise that someday I would make him pay. You are asking me to simply set it down, to let him keep his estate and his life and go on unpunished by my hand, and to spend my life instead on you, on us, on being happy, in spite of him, which I have never once, in all these years, imagined I was allowed to be." "Yes," said Margaret. "That is exactly what I am asking. Be happy in spite of him. It is the only revenge that ever actually works, the only one that does not cost you your soul, and it is the one he can least bear, because a man like my father cannot endure the thought that his victims went on to be happy without him, that they did not spend their lives thinking about him at all. Live well, Julian. Love me. Build something warm out of the wreckage he made. Let him grow old alone with his cold estate and his colder heart, and let us not spare him one single thought. That is how you win, not by grinding him down, by walking away into a life so full and so warm that he becomes at last what he most deserves to be: irrelevant, forgotten, a cruel old man neither of us thinks about while we are busy being happy. That is the revenge worth having. Will you take it? Will you take me and the life, instead of him and the grinding? I have waited a year to ask you. I am asking now." He took her. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, and the best, and it did not happen all at once. A man does not set down a decade of hatred in a single night, but it happened, over the weeks and months that followed, because Margaret had shown him the door out of the trap, and he walked through it, slowly, one step at a time, with her hand in his. It was harder than Margaret had made it sound, the setting down, and she had known it would be, and did not pretend otherwise. For the revenge had not been merely a plan. It had been the Duke's whole self, the thing that had held him together through the worst years of his life. When his father died, broken, ruined, shamed into an early grave by Lord Crane's greed, the boy who became the Duke of Thorncliffe had been drowning, and the promise of revenge had been the plank he clung to. Someday, I will make him pay. It had got him through the grief, and the poverty, and the slow rebuilding of what Crane had wrecked. It had been his purpose, his spine, his reason to rise in the morning. And now Margaret was asking him to let go of the plank in open water. And there were days, in the weeks after he called off his agents, when he felt he was drowning all over again. Hollow, purposeless. A man who did not know who he was, if he was not the instrument of his father's vengeance. "I feel I have lost myself," he confessed to her, one gray afternoon, in the study where he had once plotted Crane's ruin and now sat idle and adrift. "For years, I knew exactly what I was for. I was the sword that would fall on the man who killed my father. Every decision, every day, bent toward that one end. And now I have set it down, because you showed me it was poisoning me, and you were right. But Margaret, I do not know what is left. Take away the revenge, and I do not know who the Duke of Thorncliffe is. I have been the avenger so long, I have forgotten how to be anything else. I am free of him, as you said I would be, and I am also lost, and hollow, and afraid, because the thing that held me together is gone, and I do not yet know what will hold me together now." And Margaret took his hands, and answered him with the hard-won wisdom of a woman who had rebuilt herself once already, out of the wreckage the same man had made. "I will tell you what holds you together now," she said, "the same thing that has held me together since I left my father's house. Not a purpose aimed at him, that is his kind of spine, a self built around another person, and it is a cold and hollow thing whether the other person is loved or hated. What holds you together now is a life built around what you love, not what you hate. You feel hollow because you have taken out the hatred and not yet put anything in its place, and that is frightening, and I understand it, and it will pass. Because we are going to fill the hollow, Julian, you and I, with the things a life is actually for. This estate, which you can love and tend for its own sake now, instead of merely holding it as a base for your war. Your tenants, who can be your care instead of your resource. This marriage, which can be your joy. Children, perhaps, in time. The hollow does not stay hollow, my love. You have merely emptied out the poison, and the emptiness frightens you. But it is the emptiness of a cleared field, not a grave. And we are going to plant it, together, with everything good that your hatred left no room for. Give it time. A man does not learn a new spine in a fortnight. But you will learn it, and I will help you, because I learned it myself, the same way, out of the same wreckage. And I promise you, on the far side of the hollow, there is a self worth being, a self that is yours, and not shaped by him at all. I found mine. I will help you find yours. That is what the marriage is for." And the Duke of Thorncliffe held his wife's hands in the study where he had plotted a ruin he would never now complete, and believed her, because she had done it herself, had rebuilt a self out of the same cruelty, and stood before him as living proof that there was life on the far side of letting go. And slowly, over the months that followed, exactly as she had promised, the hollow filled, with the estate he learned to love, and the tenants he learned to care for, and the marriage that warmed from cold to golden, and a self, at last, that was his own, and no one's monument, least of all his enemies. It was the hardest thing he ever did. It was also the only road to the only happiness he ever knew, and he walked it because Margaret walked it beside him, having walked it once herself, and knowing the way. He stopped the machine. He called off his agents, released the debts he had been buying up, abandoned the maneuver against her father's estate, and turned his attention, for the first time in years, entirely away from the man who had ruined his family, and entirely toward the woman who had married him for love. It was strange and frightening at first, that turning, for the revenge had been the organizing principle of his whole adult life, the load-bearing wall of him, and pulling it down left him, for a time, hollow and disoriented, a man who did not know who he was, if he was not the instrument of his father's vengeance. And Margaret was there for all of it, patient and clear, helping him build, in the empty space where the hatred had been, something new, a marriage, a partnership, a warmth. She had married the man under the revenge, and now, with the revenge gone, that man came fully up into the light at last, and he was, as she had known he would be, as she had gambled her whole heart that he would be, a good man, a warm man, a man capable of a great and tender love, who had only been buried for years under the cold armor of his hatred. They fell in love, truly, both of them, in the daylight, freely, which was a strange thing to happen to two people already a year married, and sweeter for its strangeness. For Margaret had loved him from the first, one-sidedly, in the cold. And now she had the joy of watching him come to love her back, of feeling the marriage warm from her side outward, of being, at last, seen and cherished by the man she had chosen in the dark and waited for so long. And the Duke discovered that the wife he had married as a weapon was, in fact, the finest woman he had ever known, brave and clear-sighted and kind, and possessed of a wisdom hard-won from the same cruelty that had shaped him, and that he had spent a year with a treasure in his own house and been too consumed by hatred to see it. He set about making up for the lost year with the particular devotion of a man who knows exactly how nearly he threw away everything, and Margaret let him, and forgave him the cold year completely, because she understood it, because she had known what he was when she married him, and had married him anyway, hoping for exactly this. There was one morning, some weeks after the confession, that Margaret marked as the moment she knew the warmth had truly come, and that the cold year was over for good. She had come down early, out of long habit, the drudge's habit of rising before the house, that her father had beaten into her and that had never left her, and had found her husband already in the breakfast room, and he had risen when she entered, which he had always done, correctly, coldly, a duke observing the forms. But this morning, he had not merely risen. He had crossed the room to her, and taken her hands, and said, awkwardly, like a man using unfamiliar words, "I have been thinking, in the night, about the year, our first year, about all the mornings you came down early, and I sat here reading my letters, and I never once asked you to sit with me, or spoke to you as a person, or noticed that you were rising before the whole house, out of some old habit that I now understand your father put into you. I saw all of it, and none of it, and I find I cannot bear it, now. The wasted mornings, a whole year of them, you and I in the same cold rooms, and I never reached across the table. So I am reaching now. Sit with me, Margaret, not because it is correct, because I want your company, which I did not know how to want a year ago, and want more than anything now. Sit with me, and let us waste no more mornings." And Margaret Thorncliffe, who had come down early alone for a year in a cold house, sat with her husband in the morning light, and he poured her chocolate, clumsily, having never poured anyone anything in his life, and asked her, actually asked, and listened to the answer, what she meant to do with her day, and told her what he meant to do with his, and the two of them talked, easily, warmly, over the breakfast table, for the first time in a marriage more than a year old, like two people at the beginning of something, rather than the middle. "You are courting me," Margaret observed, over the chocolate, with a smile she could not suppress. "We have been married 14 months, Julian, and you are courting me, pouring my chocolate, asking after my day. It is entirely backwards." "It is entirely backwards," the Duke agreed, "and I intend to do it anyway, thoroughly, for as long as it takes, because I married you without courting you, and used you without knowing you, and I find I want to do it all again in the right order, to court my own wife, to earn what I already have, to make you fall in love with me on purpose, after a year of loving me in the cold, with no encouragement at all. You loved me when I gave you nothing. I should like to see whether you can love me when I actually try. It seems only fair to give you the chance." He looked at her, and there was nothing cold in his face at all now, only a kind of wondering warmth. "I spent a year with a treasure in my house, and did not see it. I have the rest of my life to make up for the year, and I mean to spend it courting you, Margaret, backwards and late, and gratefully, until you have been wooed as thoroughly as any woman in England, because you married me for love, and got a cold year for your trouble, and I owe you a warm lifetime, and I mean to pay it in full." And Margaret, who had married for love and waited a year in the cold, found herself being courted by her own husband over the breakfast chocolate, and discovered that being loved back, after so long loving alone, was even sweeter than she had let herself imagine in the lonely nights, and that the warm life she had gambled everything on had arrived at last, backwards and late, and better than she had dared to hope. She had bet her whole heart, in the dark, on the man under the revenge, and here he was, in the morning light, pouring her chocolate and wooing her 14 months into their marriage, proving her right about him at last. And there is no vindication in the world, she thought, watching him, sweeter than being proven right about the person you refused to give up on. The father came, once, near the end. For old Lord Crane, Margaret's father, the Duke's enemy, had heard that the Duke of Thorncliffe had abandoned the maneuvers against his estate, had called off the agents, had ceased, entirely, to move against him. And Lord Crane, being the kind of man he was, could not understand it except as weakness or as trap, and came to Thorncliffe to discover which, and found, instead, the one thing he was least equipped to comprehend: indifference. He found his daughter and her husband happy. He found a warm house, and a marriage plainly full of love, and two people who received him with perfect cold courtesy, and not one flicker of the hatred or the fear or the calculation he understood. He had come expecting to find an enemy still bent on his destruction, or a beaten man who had given up the fight. Some relationship, some acknowledgement, some proof that he still mattered to the people he had wronged. And he found that he did not matter to them at all, that they had, quite simply, moved beyond him. That his daughter, whom he had valued at nothing, had built a life of such evident happiness that his cruelty had become a small, cold thing in her past, unregarded, and that the Duke, whose family he had destroyed, had stopped thinking about him entirely, had let him go, had chosen a warm life over the cold satisfaction of revenge, and in the choosing, had rendered Lord Crane exactly what Margaret had foretold: irrelevant. "You are not going to ruin me," Lord Crane said to the Duke, half accusing, half bewildered. "You had me. I know you did. The debts, the mortgages. You had the means to break me, and you have let it all go. Why? What game is this? No man simply abandons a revenge he has spent years and a marriage to build. What do you want?" "I want nothing from you," the Duke of Thorncliffe said, and Lord Crane heard, with dawning horror, that it was true. "That is the thing you cannot understand, and it is your whole punishment, so I will explain it to you plainly. As a kindness, I do not owe you. I spent years wanting to destroy you. I married your daughter as a weapon against you, and then I discovered that your daughter, whom you threw away, whom you valued at nothing, is worth more than my entire revenge, and that in spending my life hating you, I was letting you shape it, letting you win, becoming a cold, consumed creature exactly like yourself. So I stopped. I let you keep your estate, not because you deserve mercy. You do not. But because I deserve a life that is not about you, and so does Margaret, and we have built one, and you are not in it, and you never will be again. You came here to find out whether you still matter to us. You do not. That is the answer, and it is the worst thing I could possibly say to a man like you, and I say it without heat, because you are not worth heat anymore. You are an old man who ruined everyone who ever loved him, and will die alone with his cold estate, and my wife and I are going to be happy for the rest of our lives, and we are not going to think about you at all. That is your ruin, Lord Crane, not the seizure of your lands. The discovery that your victims went free, and were happy, and forgot you. Good day. I do not expect we shall meet again, and I find, to my own surprise, that I do not care whether we do." And Lord Crane went away, not ruined in fortune, but ruined in the only way that could touch him, which was to be shown that he had become irrelevant to the people whose lives he had tried to own. And he did grow old alone with his cold estate, and die unmourned, exactly as Margaret had said. And neither the Duke nor the Duchess of Thorncliffe spared him more than a passing thought for the rest of their long and happy lives, which was the most complete revenge either of them could have taken, and the only one that cost them nothing of themselves. The marriage that had begun as a weapon became one of the warmest in England. And the Duke of Thorncliffe, who had once married a woman for revenge, spent the rest of his life grateful past expression that she had married him for love, and known everything, and chosen him anyway, and waited in the cold for him to see her, and then shown him the way out of the trap that had nearly consumed him. "She saved me twice," he would say, late in their life, when the story of their strange beginning was old enough to tell. "Once by marrying me, which took her out of her father's house and put the one person who could reach me inside my own. And once, on the night I confessed I had married her for revenge, by telling me she had known all along and married me for love. and then showing me that revenge is only letting the person who hurt you decide who you become. I married her to punish her father. She married me to save us both. Only one of us understood what marriage was for, and it was not the Duke. It was the overlooked daughter I had thought a mere weapon, who turned out to be the wisest and bravest soul I ever met, and who loved me through a cold year I did not deserve, and waited, and hoped, and was right. I gave up my revenge for her. It is the best bargain I ever made. I traded a cold satisfaction I would have choked on for a warm life I could never have imagined, and I have not thought about her father in 30 years, which she assures me, and I believe, is exactly the revenge he most deserved, and the only one worth taking. And Margaret, Duchess of Thorncliffe, who had married a man for love knowing he married her for revenge, and had waited a year in the cold and been proven right, would only smile and take her husband's hand and say that she had known, from the very first, that there was a good man under the revenge. She had staked her whole heart on it, in the dark, with no proof but her own stubborn hope, and that being proven right about the man you love is the sweetest vindication there is, and worth every cold night of the waiting.